All right, y'all, come in here, have a seat, get you a snack, get your drink, do whatever you got to do, because today we are going to unpack what my grief looks like. Um, so it's officially been 2 years, 5 months, and 16 days that I've been a widow. Um, from a conversation I had last night, I felt compelled to talk about it because, a lot of widows, they don't talk about it. They don't talk about death or anything else like that. And for all you nosy folks out there thinking that I'm going to tell you how he died and what happened and everything else like that, if you know, you know. If you don't ask. And that's really the first thing I want to talk about. When I first became a widow, that question made my skin crawl. Um, it bothered me because I never really understood how nosy people were. And I never understood how people just had that real bad, they were just nosy, really. There's no way of sugarcoating it. There's no way of making it pretty or anything else like that. People were just nosy as hell. And so in the beginning I had a lot of people come up to me and they'd be like, I'm sorry this happened to you and he was a good guy. Well, how'd he die? And I would just sit there and look at them. Um, or I would just sit there, or I would direct that question to another family member because one thing about James, that was my husband, one thing about him, he was private when he was alive. He was a real private person. He didn't talk about his private life on social media or anything else like that. Um, really, you didn't know he had a private life unless you knew him, if we're going to be honest. So for me, I just felt like because you were a private person when you were alive, I'm still going to maintain that privacy after you've passed on. And like I said, that's just an important thing to me because, over the course of our 6 year marriage, we talked about death. Um, Not a lot, but we talked about death. Uh, Mainly because I took a death and dying class in college. So shout out to that class, shout out to that teacher, shout out to MTSU. And honestly, it really prepared me for what I was going to go through. And I had absolutely no idea what was going to happen because honestly, he died unexpectedly. So, one thing when we did have discussions about it, one thing he told me was um, it didn't matter to him how he died. He wanted people to remember him for the way he lived. He wanted people to remember him laughing, remember him smiling, remember him telling jokes, or uh, whatever positive impact he had on your life. And if he had a negative impact on your life, look, I apologize. He was a true Aries. Sometimes he could have been, a little nitpicky or whatever. I had to live with it too. You lived with it at some point. I'm just gonna put that out there. Like honestly, he was temperamental sometimes. But that question really, it bothered me because I'm like, why do you need to know? At this point, how he died is not important. It's the fact that he's dead. Like that's really it. And, I've ran into a couple people where they would ask what happened and I wouldn't tell them and they would get offended. And if you know me, my first instinct would to go ahead and just cuss them out because why do you need to know why he died anyway? And what you getting mad for? Because it wasn't your spouse, wasn't your brother, wasn't your cousin, wasn't your close friend, wasn't, your best friend or anything else like that. Like I just felt like the people who did know and the people that were a part of his everyday life, they knew. But I've had not randoms, but I've had friends ask what happened and they would get offended because I wouldn't tell them anything. And my thing is it wasn't none of your business anyway. Um and that was it, but that question always pissed me off because it just I think that question is poor taste. Like you asked that question in poor taste. Because there's nothing you're gonna get out of knowing how he died. That was one thing that irritated me in the beginning. Now I just ignore the question and move on. Um, because 2 years later, I still feel like it's none of your business. Let's just be honest. So don't ask. Don't ask. Um, Another thing that just kind of bothered me in the beginning, it just felt like once people knew that I was a widow, my husband passed away, or however you want to put it, um, it was like sharks. They could sense the blood in the water, and I had random men coming out of nowhere, and I do mean nowhere. They would be like, "My condolences. Do you want to get together later?" And I'm like, "What? What is that? Y'all must smell like singleness in the air." And then, like, I don't know what possessed them to come to me after just losing my after just losing James, but it just really bothered me because I'm like, dude, to be 100% honest, I don't want you looking at me. I don't want you breathing in my direction. I want you to pretend like I'm not here. I am a widow. My skin is crawling, like I'm not okay. And so you're hitting on me just makes me uncomfortable. And I haven't been a widow for more than a month, and here you come sniffing around me like some dog sniffing around food. And that just bothered me. And people would try to use that to hit on me. And they'd be like, well, I know you need somebody to talk to. And, you know, I'll be that listening ear. And then next thing you know, that transitions into, well, let me come and cuddle with you. And ladies, if you know, you know. And cuddling with you transitions into, well, I just want to make you feel better. And then that would turn into sex because that's the ultimate goal that some of them people had. Now, granted, I would never, I didn't do that. I still don't, but it really bothered me because I just felt like the expectation was for me to cope with sex. And I'm going to be honest, I probably was that person when I was younger in my early teens. I mean, in my late teens, in my early 20s, but I mean, at 27 at the time, I didn't want to do that. It was just not something I wanted to do. And I was really uncomfortable with the transition. Um, it didn't feel good. And it was just being hit on and having people attracted to me. It made me uncomfortable. Even though I had been married for 6 years and my husband, he hit on me all the time, honestly. And even though when I was married, people would hit on me, I wouldn't give them the time of day, but like consciously knowing and being aware that somebody's hitting on me after this tragedy struck, it made me uncomfortable, and it made me like really reevaluate the people around me and the people I dealt with, because my train of thought was, if you are going to hit on me after I just lost my husband, um and he hasn't been gone for more than a month, and you see I'm trying to work through it, then I just feel like, give me that respect, give me that space to work through it. Um Now, if you want to be a listening ear, then be a genuine listening ear and don't have ulterior motives. That was just how I felt. And again, this is my grief journey and what I'm dealing with, what I still deal with, what I go through, and things like that. And so, another thing that really, I had trouble processing. I had an issue processing what I just went through. When we were at the hospital and they told me that he passed away, I'll put it to you this way. When we got to the hospital and they called a code blue, something in my spirit told me it was him. Trigger warning, I'm going to cry. But something in my spirit told me it was him. And so I started preparing myself. When they moved me to the quiet room, I knew it was him. When the chaplain came in and started trying to talk to me, I was like, I just want my dad. I called my dad and I was like, you have to hurry. Like, you have to hurry. And And the chaplain's like, well, do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe in a higher power? And like I told him, I just want my dad. Um, so when the doctor came in and told me what happened, I literally just sat there. I was numb. I was numb. And I sat there and I was like, okay, okay. And my dad's sitting here looking at me. My dad is in tears. And if you know my dad, you know my dad doesn't cry. And so the doctor was like, do you want to see him? And I said, no, not right now. My dad's like, well, I'll go see him first. So my dad went to go see him. Excuse me. My dad went to go see him. And my dad came back with tears in his eyes. And I knew it was over. I knew it was over. And James had always told me that he wanted me to remember him when he was alive, when he was smiling and laughing. That he didn't want a casket. He didn't want to be buried. He didn't want an open casket or anything else like that. He wanted people to remember him for him laughing and things like that and spreading joy. And he told me that if anything ever happened to him, he didn't want me to see him. And of course, in true Dejime shape, form, and fashion, I was hard headed. Um, I saw him anyway. I did. I saw him anyway. And I touched him, and he was still warm. And somewhere in my irrational mind, I was thinking it wasn't over. So, um, the doctors, like I said, after I saw him, I told him I loved him and I told him I was sorry. I had to tell my niece. And that was like his daughter. That was our kid. My sister had her, but she belonged to us. That was, her father, unfortunately, he passed away. But James truly stepped in, and that was her left hand, right hand. That was her best friend. That was her dad. He really stepped up. And I had to tell my niece that she lost a father figure again. And I couldn't get it out, and the only thing I could do was apologize to her. So with all that, she told me it was going to be okay because she didn't cry. But after we finished up with the doctors and things like that, I went out to the parking lot and I was walking to my dad's uh, vehicle, and I just sat there and collapsed in the parking lot, because it had finally hit me that the person I looked at every day for 6 years, that I was leaving him at the hospital, that he wasn't going to get up and come with me. He wasn't going to walk through the door and say, hey, I'm just kidding. I wasn't going to be able to sleep with them that night. I wasn't going to be able to get dinner with them or anything else like that. So when I came out of the hospital, it physically hit me. And all I could do was cry because I feel like I failed them. And it was hard for me to grasp the concept that I left him in there, because in my mind, he still wasn't dead. He was still alive. Um, and so when I got home, everybody rallied around me. My best friends, my sisters, I call them. My sisters came, my family came, and all I can remember was laughing and crying off and on. That's all I remember. That's all I remember was laughing and crying off and on. I remember my family reaching out to me. I remember a lot of people reaching out to me, but all I did was cry and laugh. And if you knew us as a couple, you knew we would make a joke out of anything. It didn't matter what it was. We was gonna laugh. Um, and so as time went on and I left him at the hospital, I noticed that I had some irrational fears that started to set in. I think for a month straight, I couldn't sleep by myself. So my sister and my niece stayed at my house for a month, and I had to have my niece in the bed, or else I wasn't going to sleep. And you know, uh, don't tell her that I'm telling y'all this, but she snores a little bit, and James was a snorer. You could hear him in the back of the house. He was in the back of the house, and we was in the front, and you could hear him. He sounded like a freight train. Um, but my niece, she snored a little bit, and I needed that to go to sleep, so I would never sleep alone. I had to have her sleep in the bed with me for a month. Um, and then if they went home, if my sister and my niece went home, my dad was there. Um, and part of the fears are I couldn't sleep without the lights being on. I have no idea what it was about being in the dark. Um, but if you turned off the lights, there was a fear in me that something was going to happen. I'm not sure what it was. I don't know where it came from, but I couldn't sleep in the dark for about a month straight. Um, and I during that month, I just felt really unsafe and unprotected. And like my dad explained to me, when you get married to somebody, not only is there a bond, but there's a sense of protection there. And once that, I'm not going to say the bond was severed, but once he passed away, it's like my body and my mind automatically knew. Um, because I just felt like now you're out here by yourself. You have no covering. Now you have to watch your back. He's not here to watch your back. And if you knew him, you knew he was my bodyguard, honestly. And I just felt unsafe and unprotected. Um, and there were times where I wouldn't go to sleep and I couldn't close my eyes because, there was a lot of trauma attached to his death. And so I couldn't close my eyes without seeing him. And I had auditory hallucinations. I would hear his last words and things like that. And so it got to the point where I didn't sleep because I didn't want to keep replaying the same thing over and over and over again. I didn't want to keep living in that day. And it was like at the time, if I closed my eyes, I would replay it all the time. And it's like it's bad enough that when I was awake, my mind always replayed it. But when I'm asleep, I don't want to be jolted awake because you think you hear somebody or you're seeing the same thing over and over and over again, um, especially traumatic scenes and things like that. Um, there were times where I had the first week when it had actually been a week, I had that irrational thought that he was going to walk through the door and be like, "Hey, I'm just kidding. I was just kidding." And he never walked through the door and he never said I was just kidding. Like he was really gone. Um so as time went on, I just honestly I had to pray. I had to pray because my biggest fear came true. Honestly, my biggest fear was that he would pass away and leave me here by myself. And that's something that I struggle with, that my biggest fear had come and gone. And it was like I was left to put the pieces together and I was left to figure out up from down, left from right. It was me that was stuck here trying to figure out how to put the pieces back together again. Um, Something that some of my family members struggled with is as soon as he passed away that night and during the course of that week, I started packing up his stuff immediately. And my mom had asked me, she's like, "You don't want to wait?" And I was like, "No, because if I wait, I'm not going to let it go. I'm not going to let it go. And it's not going to help me keeping it. It's going to hurt me more than anything else." So I started donating his clothes, giving away his shoes, and I started boxing up his stuff because I knew I couldn't keep it. I knew I couldn't keep it. I threw the cologne out and everything else like that because if I kept it, I was going to physically get sick and I would have never I would have never started my healing process. Um and I just recently got to the point where I can look at pictures of them because at first when I would see pictures of James, I would get angry. I would be angry because I'm like, you really left me here. Like, you got out of this hellhole early. You dodged a bullet. You dodged COVID. Like, he dodged COVID. Thank God for it, but it just, I was left here to deal with everything. And, I wasn't angry at him per se, but I was angry that I was in this position. I was angry that I had to figure out what to do. Like, I had to figure it out. I had to figure it out. Now, mind you, we were only married for 6 years, and I'd been figuring my own life out and everything else like that before we got married. But I was like, now I have to do it. I don't have anybody to fall back on. It's me. I have to stand on my own 2 feet. Like, I have to do it. And then one day I prayed, and I was like, God, I wouldn't wish this pain on anybody. This hurts. It hurts, and it don't feel good. But I've come to terms with the fact that I'm not going to allow this to stop me. Most people, when they lose a spouse, some people, life stops for them. And one thing that James and I talked about, he's like, if anything happens to me, he's like, I want you to take the necessary time. He's like, but I do want you to get married again. I do want you to go out there and be happy and do what makes you happy. And for a while, I couldn't do that because I felt like a part of my heart was missing. I couldn't enjoy the things that I used to enjoy. I couldn't, I felt like I just couldn't. I just couldn't. And if I did, I felt guilty because here he is, you know, dead, and I'm here laughing and enjoying myself and enjoying the small things. And I know many people, they probably wonder how I'm doing or how I am continuing to smile and things like that. And honestly, it takes prayer. It takes prayer. It takes therapy. Honestly, it takes practice because I could be sad. That is very, very true. And some days I am sad. And some days it feels like the world is ending. And then there are days where I'm like, I can do this. I can get through this. And I'm optimistic and I'm able to get through the day. Please excuse the dog. He also left me here with two four-legged kids that are bad, that really were his four-legged babies. Um, but prayer got me through it. My family got me through it. My friends got me through it. A lot of the times my friends knew that I didn't want to leave the house, but they invited me out anyway. And even though I would sit there quiet, they would still, they would act like things were normal, and that's what I needed. Because um, if you treated me fragile, I would get upset because I'm like, my husband just died. I'm not fragile. I'm not gonna break. I just need you to be normal. I need you to be normal. And if you decide you want to cry with me, cry with me. But if you don't, that's okay too. I'll go and cry by myself. Or y'all can sit there and watch me cry. But I need you to be normal. Um, and I also I stopped drinking. Now, I wasn't an alcoholic or anything else like that, and I didn't drink heavily before, but I knew with the situation with with being in this in the life transition that I was in, I knew that it was easy for me to cope with substances and things like that. And I decided that if I'm going to deal with this, if I am going to grieve, I'm going to grieve sober. Um, because it's easy to fall in the pattern of self medicating with alcohol, with drugs, with sex, or whatever the case may be. But like I said, I knew I had to feel it. I had to feel it. And another thing that helped me throughout this whole process is that my dad, he prayed. He prayed that night. Um, everybody was hurt. Everybody was hurt because when we lost him, no pun intended, but we lost a giant. We lost the noise. We lost the laughter. Like we lost it. And my dad, one night, I sat in his room and I asked him. I was like, "Why would God do this to me? Like it's me suffering. How much more do I have to suffer? I don't have nothing else to give." And my dad reminded me that God does all things well, and that even though my best friend is not here, I experienced a love that it takes people a lifetime to experience. I experienced true companionship. He was really my best friend. Aside from my sister, he was my soulmate. He was my soulmate. And it's funny, but we called it a throuple. Uh, it was always me, him, and my sister, and of course my niece. But when you saw him, you saw me. When you saw me, you saw my sister. When we was together in the same room, we was laughing. We had some nonverbal communication cues going on, and people would hate us because we just be sitting there cackling. But my dad, and even still, my dad still has to remind me that God does all things well, because there are days where it feels like it's been 2 years, and then there are days where it feels like it was just yesterday, and I'm having to reconfigure my life all over again. And it just, I don't know how to explain it. However, I do want to tell y'all that grief is not linear. It's not a straight path that you go through. It is a roller coaster. Grief is something that you're going to experience, unfortunately, for the rest of your natural born life. And people say, time heals all wounds. Time doesn't heal this wound. Time will make it easier to deal with on some days. And then on some days, you're going to deal with it like it was yesterday. But time doesn't heal this wound. This is something that you're going to feel for a long time. And another question that people often ask me, well, do you think you'll get married again? Yes, I do think I'll get married again. Am I looking to get married right now? No. And whoever I'm with and or decide to be with, that is something that they're going to have to understand. Um, and for those of y'all that ask the question, well, you think a man is going to put up with loving another man and crying over another man and blah 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 blah, because I've been told that myself. Um, the love I have for James and the love I will have for somebody else or whatever the case may be, the love is different. You love them differently. Um, and like I tell people, I'm very, very fortunate to have spent 6 years with my best friend. There are things that he taught me that I could have never learned from anybody else but him. There were situations that we were in that I couldn't survive with anybody else but him. And I'm eternally grateful to him for teaching me the things that he did. And out of his death, I learned how strong I can be. I learned that that I can make it. I learned that when life gives me a reason to be depressed, I can make the conscious effort and the choice not to be. And at this point in my life, I choose to be happy. That's my choice. Um, there will be a part two to this because there is a part two to this. That is just this was just the personal part of my grief. There is a professional part of my grief. There are things that I had to deal with there were things I had to deal with at my old job that just it further traumatized me and it damaged me and things like that. So look for a part two of my grief journey. I know it was a long video. I know I was rambling a lot of the time. I don't know if you got anything out of it, but thank you for listening. Anyway, this is Des Del Rey. I'm missing my other half, but I just felt compelled to get on here and talk about it. I'm signing out. Peace.